Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 7 of the GodCentral Podcast. Today's guest is Ruth Bancewicz from the Faraday Institute. We're going to be discussing whether faith and science can work hand in hand. It should be a good one. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, we're recording. Hello Ruth, how you doing?
Hello, hi, great to see you.
Welcome to the GodCentral Podcast. We've been trying to arrange this one for a little while now, haven't we? So I normally start off by getting the guest to introduce themselves. So go for it.
Yeah, so my name's Ruth Bancewicz. I am from Scotland. You might be able to tell from my accent, but it's been a while. I was brought up by lovely Christian parents and grew up in the north of England. I've lived around a little bit, lived in Scotland for a bit, studied biology, got into genetics for a while. And then now I'm down in Cambridge. Now I work in the whole wonderful world of science and faith. It's quite a niche. I never thought I'd end up doing this kind of job, but I have. So yeah, I live in Cambridge. I've just been clearing out the shed.
Fair enough. I've been looking forward to this podcast because so I come to God in my mid-20s. So I went through the education system, being taught about science, genetics, not to the level that you have, obviously, but the universe, and obviously it's all from a science perspective. So I come to God, and although there's a brief understanding there, you're told this is what you believe, or this is what you should believe now as a Christian. But I think when you come to God later on in life, it's difficult because you've got that background. You've got that background of, well, I believe in the Big Bang and evolution, etc. So I'm looking forward to having a bit of a discussion with that later on. So you currently work with the Faraday Institute.
Yeah. It's so I was in the lab. I'd done my PhD and I was doing my research, and then I just thought, this is not everything that I am, and it does demand everything. Doing a career in sort of research, so I looked into going into science communication, and then I was a member of this organization called Christians in Science. Which is for people, it does what it says on the tin. It's for Christians who are in science. I was a member, professor in my church in Aberdeen, where I did my first few years of studying, encouraged me to join, and they advertised a job working for them. And it ticked a lot of the boxes of the things I wanted to do, so I went for it. And then after a few years, a couple of the members who were doing research down in Cambridge, were members of a college in Cambridge, and they had been running some lectures on science and faith for a while, and then they thought they'd apply for some funding to do some more. They got a bit overexcited and set up an institute. So, and I said, I was working part-time for Christians in Science. I wanted to do something with the other part of my time that didn't involve being in a lab. I wasn't quite patient enough for the lab work, and so I moved down to Cambridge and started working with them. So my job is helping people in churches like yourself. I mean, doing exactly the kind of things you're just talking about, helping people to think through, how do I as a Christian think about science and faith? How can we be relevant to the world? How can we engage with the work, what people are doing, what people thinking, and what's important. And I mean, especially times, there's always something on people's minds, but at the moment, obviously with COVID, so I've been working through some of those issues, and so
is it like what's the word I'm looking for, like reaching out to local churches? What does that look like? What does that entail? How does the Faraday Institute go about that?
Well, I should have said the Faraday Institute in general, it's an academic institute, little independent Institute. It started off as a part of St Edmund's College, but we've just gone independent. We got big enough to go independent. And one of the main things that happens is sort of interdisciplinary research. So at the moment, we've got a theologian working with an earth scientist on sort of earthquakes and so-called natural disasters and the outcomes and how that affects people's faith. And, that's one of the interdisciplinary projects. We've got a philosopher looking at the afterlife, philosopher, theologian, really interesting. Well, I think it's really interesting. And and then there's a schools and youth team. There's someone who does general media outreach, and then I do stuff with churches. And yeah, it looks a bit like this. So, we did doing this podcast this morning. We had the last session of a short course for people who were mainly, actually it was a mixture. It was leaders in the church. It was students who were bereft because Word Alive was cancelled. So a bunch of science students joined us, and others who just interested, and a few speakers helping people to get thinking about science and faith. Put loads of resources online. Visit churches. Normally I'll do a bit of preaching, bit of speaking around, all sorts. Yeah, we're about to come to Harlow actually, hopefully in the autumn, to run a training course for another church.
Oh really?
But so anyway, I shouldn't say that online live because it probably don't be open to the general public. But anyway, there's various people engaging in different ways. So,
I see. Yeah. Okay. So I assume it's named after Michael Faraday. Why Michael Faraday? Because
he was a faithful Christian. Yeah, he really took his faith seriously, preached in his local church. Sundays were Sundays. He was around visiting people and teaching in the church, and he was obviously a fantastic scientist and didn't see a conflict between the two. He didn't talk about the relationship between the two very much. He was quite quiet about his faith, but he did say, I think it was to Prince Albert, so it was fairly public, something along the lines of, I've quoted this in talks so often, but something like the things that we study as scientists were written by the finger of God, or words to that effect. We're studying the stuff that God made. But I'd have to Google Michael Faraday quotes, probably the first one you find.
Well, that kind of leads me into, I suppose, the overriding question and the big question that you would get asked in your role, and is there a place for God in science?
Well, I think it's the other way around, actually. I think it's better to, it's a really, really good question. And then I would say, because, that's the impression we get at times from movies, or, sometimes people saying provocative things on the media, or, is science sort of going off on its own? But actually, I think the people who established the scientific method hundreds of years ago, people like Galileo and others, think of more recent people like Isaac Newton. They were in their minds they were studying what God made, and you could put together a sort of basic theology of science. They wouldn't have called it science. It's only pretty recently people called it science. They'd have called it natural philosophy, sort of studying wisdom about the world, And, there's a lot of that in Job, God showing Job all this stuff. Do you know this? Do you know that? Look, I made this. I'm in charge of that, and it's all about I think it's very clear in the Bible, creation is good. God made it. He's provided for us and every creature on earth, every living thing. And we're to use it wisely. We're to explore. We're to search things out. We're to study. Solomon was a great example of studying the world. And that's what science does. Science does it. We go around looking, weighing, measuring, observing, making repeated observations, trying to understand how things work, and then using that knowledge to, hopefully do good stuff. So I think you could say it's a very Christian thing to explore the world using the tools of science.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, I'm I waste a lot of my time on YouTube. But if you saw my YouTube, suggested what videos to watch, it's madness. It's absolute madness. But I'll find something about space that I'm interested in, for example. Quite like that, it really interests me. I'll watch it and I'll listen to it, and it all makes a lot of sense to me. But then my faith kicks into it, and I think to myself, well, how do I reason, with what I'm hearing, and it's probably facts because we've got scientific proof of it, to my personal beliefs. And the route I go down is, it's generally like, just why not? Well, why can't these two things work hand in hand? Why can't the Big Bang be a design of God, for example? But I don't know if that's the correct. I don't know if that's what I should be doing. Or...
Yeah. No, I mean, and the Bible is very silent on a lot of subjects. Especially, 6-year-olds don't listen to this podcast, but be very pleased to hear me say it doesn't say a lot about going to the toilet. It says a bit, in Old Testament laws, go outside the camp. The bit but basically it's like famous 5 books. Probably nobody reads those anymore, but they never talk about the basic functions of life. There's loads of stuff you don't talk about. And it doesn't mention dinosaurs, it doesn't mention fossils, it doesn't mention the age of the universe. It's for lifting our eyes to God, and it's for lifting our eyes to his creation. So Psalm 8, Psalm 19, they're talking about the heavens are declaring the glory of God. Night by night, the stars proclaiming his glory, and this is the incredible worship, all creation is worshiping God, and we get to join in with it. It's incredible. And I don't think we have anything to be afraid of when we go out there and look, and because it's all God's. As you say, I would use the word evidence though for science. So that it's always got to be disprovable. Otherwise, you tend to, maths will do proving things, but science is about evidence. But we've got really great evidence that the universe is really old. It's all moving apart from each other and at a set rate, and the speed of light is a certain, it's unchanging. So you look at a star and you can see how long that light has been traveling from there, and you get some, these are repeated observations people make in different ways. You'll have heard all the evidence for the age of the universe and the Big Bang, and I just think how very great God is that he should make such a very great and vast and ancient universe, and it does come into, then you look at Genesis 1-3 and say, okay, the Bible's God's word, it's true, and we need to take it very seriously. It's his word to us. How on earth does that fit in? Which I guess is probably where a lot of your questions come from. And I think it's very helpful to look at the sort of the history of the interpretation of Genesis, from right from those early theologians up until now. And a great tradition of faithful Christians has been, these days are not 24 hours or however people have measured days over the years. This is a rich, deep text. It is very, very structured text. It's very, very ordered text. It's got the morning, the evening. It's got these, the first 3 days it talks about the spaces that were made, and the second 3 days it talks about what the spaces were filled with. It's rich in it is very subversive. It talks about the sun and moon. It doesn't use the words for sun and moon, which were actually words for gods. That were used around at that time. It just says big light, little light. It's like there's God and there's a light he made, and he also made the stars, which was so significant to people in other cultures around them. He said, he also made them, and he made the Leviathan, the great big creatures in the sea, which other people would have said were gods. Yeah, he made them. He plays with them. There's place, he enjoys them. So it really, really. So I think and the sun and the moon weren't made on the first day, and it's already saying in those morning and evening at first. I think that's a clue that we're looking at something that's a lot deeper, a lot richer. Now I know that there are other Christians who take a different view, and that we can have that conversation about different ways that people are interpreting this. Different faithful Christians are interpreting this in different ways. I mean, the bottom line for all Christians is that God is the creator. He made the earth for a purpose. He made us for a purpose. He interacts with us. We've sinned. We need Jesus. The basics are there, but beyond that, we do have different views. And I think particularly young people going to school need to know that different Christians will take different views on how to interpret this. And there's some great stuff online on the churches section of the Faraday website. I've got some hot topics. There's a section for hot topics. There's one on creation, and there's a whole range of websites and information recommended there. But one is a series of articles by Andrew Wilson, where he unpicks a lot of these issues. A theologian who's in New Frontiers Church in London, and on his website he's got a response by someone who takes a different view. And I think it's a really important dialogue. But I think to be able to say to a scientifically minded person, there are these different views. You need to know that if you become Christian, you don't, it's not part of the gospel that you have to interpret Genesis literally. Yeah.
I suppose that's part of the issue as well, isn't it? The fact that we're not just talking about, let's just say for argument's sake, Christians versus science. We're also talking about the different beliefs within the Christian faith. Like you said, different Christians believe different things. So you could have a conversation. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Would you say that Genesis is open to interpretation then? No, sorry, go on. No. It's just I think the whole of the Bible, when we pick it up, we need to ask. This is inspired by God. So first of all, yes, this is God's word to us. It was inspired by God. But we weren't the first audience. So we have to then, and it's not written in English. So we then have to say, well, which translation am I going to read? There's different translations, and people will pick them for different reasons. And then we need to ask, well, who wrote it? Because it's not, we don't believe that God whispered in someone's ear, absolute word for word, like the Quran was written. That Muslims would believe the Quran was written that way by an angel that, kind of dictated it. We know that humans wrote it down, and you can see their writing style, their culture is expressed in it. It's still God's word, but it's important to recognize that it was written to particular people in that first instance. And what was their culture? What does it mean when it says big light, little light? Why does it say that? And when you find out, the Hebrew words for sun and moon were actually the same words that people would use for surrounding cultures for sun god, moon god. So by deliberately avoiding those, it's lovely. The more you dig in, the more you find out. And, you read the Psalms and finding out, I just done lead a few years ago and getting taught by, how to, going this sort of walk through the Bible is amazing, and, realizing the sort of structure of the pattern of the way that people write Psalms, the different kinds of Psalms. And, we don't, you don't read bits of the Old Testament and go, well, beating babies' brains in is okay, because, I'm just picking a massively, upsetting, violent story. But, the Bible recounts things that happened and things that people felt. Some of the psalmists said, I feel like killing people. I feel like killing their children. And he's telling this to God. It's a agonizingly honest, I feel like this, God, and I'm telling it to you, and I need to know that that's what the psalmist is doing.
And it's not
okay.
this is what we do, so I think the whole of it's a very long way of saying we are always interpreting the Bible. So every bit of the Bible, some are easier than others. I mean, any new Christian, you say, well, start with maybe Mark, short gospel, easy to understand. But Genesis, because it's at the beginning, a lot of people open the Bible and go, oh, what is this? And it's hard to understand. And it's a really, really ancient bit of the Bible. A Hebrew scholar would tell you, it's really unique. And who was there, however you interpret it, it's a story about the origins of life before there was people around. So there's no eyewitnesses, so it's totally unique. And I think we have to, the same as Revelation, you look at it and you're like, man, this is crazy. Okay, I can understand the bits to the churches, don't be lukewarm. There's some things we can take away from that. And then you end up with beasts and, things crawling out of the sea. And you're like, what is this? Someone help me. Because Genesis uses plainer language. We don't do that, but we should. We really, really should.
Definitely. It's interesting what you say as well. Like I made the mistake of thinking I'm going to start the Bible from the beginning. It didn't work for me because I was reading it, I was thinking, this is bonkers. This can't be right. My wife, put me on the right step and said, no, you need to start from the New Testament, understand the New Testament, and then, try and read the Old Testament, which isn't easy. It's not an easy read, is it, the Old Testament? Oh. So I should imagine anyway, that you must face some opposition in your line of work. And well, within the whole faith in science community, I suppose there must be a lot of opposition from non-believers.
There are difficult bits. I think within the scientific world, people are, when I was being a scientist, they're more bothered about your science than what you believe. I think natural science, or the kind of science you do in a lab, I'm working with Muslims, I'm working with, atheists, I'm working with people of all different faiths. We're all doing the same experiments. And our whole mindset we bring to the lab will affect the way we do things, the way we interpret our data. Each of us will have different, slight bias here or there, or be things with stuff we're better at, stuff we're more patient at, goodness me, less likely to drop. So we're working together, we're keeping each other accountable, why didn't you do that experiment? Why don't you do that again? Giving each other ideas. And with that accountability, we end up getting closer to the truth. So I think within that world, your faith, although it's very important, people are aware that it's not, they're not going to mistrust you. In the same way that if you're in English literature or history or philosophy, your worldview will influence your work way more. So I find that Christians in those fields are much more likely to try and keep a little bit quiet about their faith in the beginning until they've got themselves established, because they don't want to be judged. And they might always be quite quiet about it. Whereas in the sciences, I mean, my friend became a lecturer at Sheffield, and she just like, you know what, I'm just going to be totally open about my faith right from the start. Support the student Christian group, everything. That was fine. Yeah, she's doing well. Where the opposition comes, I mean, there is opposition. It's a lot messier than you might expect, though. There's lack of opportunity, I think, in the media. I mean, some people have great opportunities. And it's absolutely brilliant. We occasionally get people going on the BBC Sunday programme. I've been on standby for that, haven't been on it yet, but hoping to one day. David Wilkinson does loads of great thought for the days there, and on Radio 4, there's some great opportunities, but on the whole, God, it's really hard to have a sensible voice. They are often looking for people who be a little bit exciting, a little bit controversial, and just being normal. Signs of faith, it's okay. Don't often get who we try. So I don't know if that counts as opposition. And there's blogs and things online, but you don't have to feel. I mean, I've been critiqued, but the first time I got someone to say something nasty about me on a blog, my boss said, "Great, your work has had an impact. You've annoyed someone. Good." Even if someone who doesn't think science and faith go together is annoyed by what you do, you're doing a great job. Don't reply, just leave it, carry on.
Yeah,
nice.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And to be honest, the toughest conversations are with Christians, and that's not a position. That's just we're learning how to discuss these things, and the main thing is, I find, is to keep serving God, keep loving Him, keep being faithful, keep being like, yeah, here I am. I'll do your will today. What would you like me to do? And if it leads to a difficult conversation with one of my Christian brothers and sisters, has a different view, just to do my very best to listen, and to see the commonalities in what we believe, see what the basics of Christianity are, establish that foundation. And sometimes we just have to agree to disagree, and I'm sure I've not always been that gracious 100% of the time, and I haven't always had 100% graces back, but that's the toughest, actually, to be honest, is when Christians disagree. Is where I'm a woman. I want everyone to be happy and everyone to be all pleased. So I find that a bit tricky. So
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I can see that as well. And Christians just as guilty as everybody else with being firm with their belief and not wanting to sort of waver away from, or open your mind to perhaps something else. One of the I know what you're saying. Like when I'm at work, people know I'm a Christian nowadays. I used to kind of keep it a little bit quiet, and because I didn't want to get drawn into the discussion, the argument, I suppose what we're talking about today, like the evidence of the science side of things as opposed to creationism, etc. And then kind of welcome it a little bit more nowadays. Now, I'm not saying that I'm doing what you do, because I'm definitely not qualified to do so, but I think I could have a reasonable conversation around the subject, as long as the other person is, instead of you come across these people that they believe something and they will argue and argue and argue and argue until they win, and you think, you win. Do you know what I mean? I can't be doing this anymore. I welcome that discussion nowadays, as long as it can be a discussion. So yeah. Anyway, Christians can be just as tricky as everybody else, I think.
Yeah, but I definitely think it's worth remembering that a young person going into science, they're not going to be browbeaten their whole career. It's not like that. They'll meet the odd colleague who's annoyed about Christians, it's just, they're just going to get a bit of a hard time, but it's not, that's the same in any job, isn't it? You get some people who just find you annoying and they'll either avoid you or argue with you. But I think so long as we don't say you have to choose between science and faith, and I think it's really good. I'd also say, I think, and this might be a bit controversial for some, but I think, and it is helpful when meeting a scientist not to confront them with the young earth Christian view up front, because that's not the gospel. I would far rather point them to Christians who are scientists, who they can learn from, and share the gospel, share your life, love them. And I think later they can explore those different views. But it's like feeding a Muslim pork. If you're getting to know Muslim neighbours, have them round for dinner, oh my goodness, nobody would feed them pork. I mean, you just wouldn't do it. I mean, if they became Christians later on, they might be like, no, I don't need to be bound by that law. But you're not gonna give it to them before you give them the gospel. And you're going to let them explore that for themselves.
It's funny you say that. I have witnessed that. Somebody, I used to do like the youth stuff at the church, and there was one girl. She was exploring her faith. She wasn't, she was learning. She was, in the lesson, she was learning. She was finding out things. And then somebody spoke to her one day, like while we was having a drink after the service, and he was explaining to her, the world's only a couple of thousand years old. And I was thinking, no, don't. Please don't have this discussion with her right now, because that's not where she is. You know what I mean? That's not where she's at. It's, I think maybe just tact is important in it sometimes.
Yeah.
So, you study cell biology?
I did, yeah, genetics and sort of developmental biology type stuff. Yeah.
So one of the questions that, I always write down a list of questions. You said you had a quick skim over them. Have you had a eureka moment in your study of genetics, cell biology? A moment I should word that better. A moment where you've seen sort of God's work, at play within your research.
Yeah, it's funny because when I started as a PhD student, I imagined myself having that moment, and I thought, imagine being confronted and being just like, well, obviously I believed in God and followed Jesus for a long time by then, but be like, people just, this is evidence for God. But and then I actually discovered that what I did learn I guess you could say the eureka moments I did have moments were more, it's 11 o'clock, I'm still in the lab, I'm the only one in the building, the security officer is, you get when when the security guard pops the head in to check you're all right, you're like the only one in the building. And God is helping me to do my work. This is incredible. Okay. I had a Snickers and a can of iron brew for my dinner, and I'm still going. Like, it's a tough experiment, and I'm not in tears, even though I could be. I haven't given up, even though I could have done, and that's amazing. That I think going through, anyone who looks chirpy about taking on postgraduate studies like PhD, qualifying to be a scientist, I guess. And he's like, I'm going to do it. It's going to be fine. It's going to be just like a job. You even get paid these days. And I try and burst their bubble, because everyone hates. There's always a point where you just hate it, and you've got to get through it. And that's when, and you're like, it's too hard. I can't do it.
Yeah. Okay,
and in a sense, unless you've reached the bottom, you don't know what science is like. So I think that was my eureka moment, I think. But because I talked about evidence rather than proof in science, so I don't think I'll ever get anything that make me think anything beyond. The whole thing's incredible, isn't it? Just you learn any detail about how the cell works. It's incredible. People will slip into using the language of these simple cells. I'm like, you can't put those words together. That's an oxymoron. There's no such thing. It's amazing. It's so complex. It's so beautiful. It's so, I've got a book coming out next month, June.
Okay.
Because of the Panama boat. So delayed by a month. One of the many around the world, probably. Called Wonders of the Living World. And I think people do ask me this, and I wonder if it's partly because they've seen the Louis Giglio video. Have you seen that about laminin? No?
I might have done. It rings a bell. You might have mentioned it once.
Oh, did I? Oh, oops.
You might have done.
Yeah, I really like his stuff. He's done a recent one called Symphony, which I really like. But the one where he talks about laminin, I kind of know what he means. He zooms in on the cell, and he's like, there's this thing, and it's a cross, and it's the middle of the cell, and there's God right in the middle of it. And I kind of know what he means. I think he's talking about, this is a sign of God's grace to me. This is symbolic of God's grace to me. A cross in itself, you look around, there's loads of cross shapes in the world, and they're not all evidence for God. But I think, so I think I can see what he's doing, but I would say it's not. And laminin in itself is a little bit squidgy and not. The cartoon in the textbook of it is shaped like a sort of Jesus cross that people wear around their necks, but in the cell it's sort of squinty and squidgy. I kind of see what he means, like rainbows to some people. On a bad day, they see a rainbow and they're like, thank you, God, there you are. Okay, your promises to me stand firm, although they'll light a candle and be like, God, you're with me. You know, I think that's what he means. It's a cross shape in the middle of the cell. But I mean, I'm to be perfectly honest, in conversations about science and faith, I try and turn it to God's character as revealed in the whole Bible as quickly as possible. Because I think when people discover what the Bible reveals about God's mercy, his patience, its grace.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's mind blowing. I think that for me is where I try and go, and Jesus' work in my life. I think in a postmodern world where people are iffy about evidence and authority and what have you, your story has authenticity, and you know, people are interested in people's stories. And I think your story of what God's done in your life and your beliefs about God and your experience of his character, I think, are very powerful.
Yeah, I think that's it's important, isn't it, to bring it back to, no matter what the discussion is, to bring it back to the overall message of, you know, what we believe. You know, that's God's love. So yeah, I mean, I suppose all the other little arguments are irrelevant in comparison to that.
Yeah, in a sense, I mean, they are important. And we had a guy in my church who came. Well, he was in my church later. Who came along and watched a film that we'd made that was showed at the Cambridge Science Festival. And that was a massive step for him, realizing that science and faith, you didn't have to choose. And you know, I think he might have been in the middle of an Alpha course, or he did one shortly afterwards, and he became Christian. But without that step, he would have found it tricky. He was a scientist or engineer. And so I think we do have to take people's questions seriously, but I'm not the world. I try and do my. We all struggle to listen, don't we? So I was going to say I'm not the world's best listener. I'm not bad, but you know, we can all do better listening, and I think a lot of listening to people's what's on their hearts, I think, is important. And you know, that colleague who, you know, the colleagues who get annoyed with you and debate with you, if you keep making them a coffee, you know, yeah, you know, might speak more loudly than anything.
And it's an interesting thing that, yeah, I mean, I get along with everybody at work, well, mostly. As soon as the subject turns to your faith, it all gets a little bit combative, you know. But anyway, you know, it's just the way of life, I suppose. So, faith aside, during your you know, like your years of research, I suppose, what was like, what did you enjoy? What was like something you worked on that was the, you know, the bit you'd like to do again, I suppose?
I quite like the molecular biology. So that was stuff to do with DNA and things related to DNA. Oh, it's really creative. Understanding what a gene. So it's a quick way of saying it's a sort of unit of inheritance. It's a chunk of DNA that does something. Although there's usually other bits of DNA that are relevant, always other bits of DNA that are relevant. It's more complicated than you think. But, you know, looking at a gene and the fact that you can isolate it, you can make copies of it, you can you can sequence chunks of it. In other words, you can run it through various machines that will tell you the DNA code for it, and you can then look at that code, you can compare it to other genes and all that kind of stuff. You can cut and splice it next to different things that will you know, light up if it's active. Or sorry, I'm trying to explain it really quickly without just giving you a really long and boring biochemistry lesson. You know, really, really exciting, creative things that you can do. You know, I mean, it's medical research, so learning how genes work and how someone who has a child with a problem, trying to understand what's causing that problem, and very, very powerful methods to understand that stuff. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have done that, and we did some understanding. Uncovered some things about eye development. Some people are born with bits of their eye missing, or gaps in the iris of their eye, and various things. And we looked at fish and found a gene that was the same as the humans. And their the eyes are structured fairly similarly to ours. This is a very useful, way to study eye development. And we discovered a gene that was very similar to a gene that disrupts eye development in humans. So it's a tiny step on the way. It means that someone can then study those fish and, understand more about human eye development and poke and prod them in different ways. Everything you do is a tiny, tiny step on the way. My colleague has come to the end of his career in earth sciences, brilliant earth scientist. He was the youngest professor in Cambridge University for a while till he got older. But, amazing career. But, it's like, well, what, it's all going to be out of date soon, everything I've done. But it is, it's a little brick in someone's understanding of the world, in our general understanding of the world. Yeah. Sorry, getting all philosophical.
No, I find all that fascinating. I was reading, again, this type of thing I do. I just read about random things. I was reading about the Human Genome Project the other day. Really interesting. Like the numbers that were involved when you talk about, how many like man hours were put into, going through it, and it's impressive. But then that led me on to another story. I don't know if you've seen this recently, where they've used a human stem cell put into a pig embryo, because they're planning on, I think the ultimate goal is to grow human organs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then there's the moral argument.
Yeah,
which I found interesting. The moral argument then led me on to the, our beliefs, our faith. And, where does that, if you've got somebody that's really ill, but they've got the potential of having a transplant, where does that sit with my faith? If it's a difficult subject, then it's a difficult thing to figure out.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And, we've used pig organs. People have used pig organs. Our immune systems are quite similar to pigs. So it is possible to use, people used to use pig insulin before we learned how to make it artificially, or more artificially. And people have used like pig heart valves and stuff like that but I don't think anymore. I think a lot of that stuff is, but yeah, making a whole organ is really tricky. And growing it in another animal, once you get over yuck, which I don't think is a good yuck or wow are not good basis for ethical decisions. You've got to just get over it. People didn't like blood transfusions when they were first talked about, but now we think they're normal. They're great. Once you get over that, do you think, what is this too far? Growing.
Yeah, exactly.
Would someone grow me a heart in a pig?
I mean, the thing is if I'm thinking about it personally, I think I'd be grateful for the heart. Do you know what I mean? But it's the manufacture. I just don't know. I don't know how I'd feel about it.
No, I don't. And I think it's new, and I think it will need a bit of talking about, a bit of thinking about. And I think digging into the depth of it and digging into the Bible and going beyond the, we're Christians, so we need to be suspicious of this, and thinking, no, if you had a child who really needed, what would you do? Or you needed a new heart, what would you do? Yeah, really. No, we had one at our talk that we had this morning on this course that we did with in partnership with Keswick Ministries. We had a doctor talking about sort of beginning and end of life issues, and it's recognizing that we are made in the image of God, and every person is valuable, and I think that's something that Christian faith has brought to the world. There are no worthless humans.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's great. But I think every technology can have good and bad uses. I mean, you can do terrible things with a smartphone, but you can phone an ambulance.
Yeah, also true. Okay. Test of Faith project.
Yeah.
I've been doing my research. Let's talk about that. What's the or what was the I don't know. That must have been a little while ago now.
It was still available. Yeah, so we launched it, the first bits of it, in 2009.
Okay.
And now the films are on YouTube, so yeah, you can check it out.
Okay. What's the overview of the project?
So the aim was to give churches, to equip them with something that would help them to cover all the main bases in the science of faith discussion. So we cover sort of introductory stuff, Big Bang, universe astronomy stuff, bits and bobs about the environment, climate change, stuff about the evolution question you're bringing up, creation, a bit about the ethics that we've just been talking about, a bit about neuroscience. Mm-hmm. Am I just my brain? Or as some people would like to act as if their brain doesn't, our mind is got nothing to do with our brains, which is not terribly biblical or scientific, and going through some of those issues. And there's 3.5-hour documentary episodes that are on YouTube now, and lots of languages.
Okay.
And some study materials for small groups, some youth materials, schools, stuff for church services, lots of spin-off projects, a website with lots of bits and bobs on. So they're still all available. And a little book that was some of the stories of the scientists involved in the film. How did you become a Christian? How did you become a scientist? That was quite fun. Yeah. The main test of faith was getting the project finished. It nearly just finished me off. It's a big project.
Worth it though, I'm sure. So would it be aimed at people like me that sort of have questions on both sides of the equation?
Totally. Okay. And your non-Christian friends, I tried to design the study material so you could answer all the questions if you weren't a Christian. So I mean, obviously if you were a group of Christians, you might use some of the, we suggest prayer and worship at the end. You might not want to do that if you had your non-Christian friends with you, but yeah. And I don't think, the videos have dated a bit in their style, although to begin with, they were so beautiful. They're not as dated as they could have been if it was low budget production, but I don't think the science is massively out of date. I think we were general enough.
Okay.
Not for it not to, but you talked about the Human Genome Project, and the guy who directed it, Francis Collins, is a Christian, and has been now he leads the medical research in the US. He's been doing so for a long time. Very faithful Christian, really, really keen to share his faith. There's loads. Google Francis Collins Christian. There's tons online you'll find from him that is really, really encouraging. That. And quite funny.
That's the kind of thing I find fascinating as well. Like, this is somebody that's done, an incredibly important piece of research, like who's also faithful. Do you know what I mean? And I suppose you see that throughout history as well. Okay, let's move on.
Sorry, I'll just mention before we move on to something sensible. YouTube, N.T. Wright and Francis Collins song Genesis. Google that. And it's a very funny song all about that they did. They're both musicians, and they wrote a funny song about Genesis. So have a little look for that.
I'll check it out. I'll have to check it all out, to be honest with you. So I've got some questions.
Okay.
Some of them are my own. Some of them are ones that people have messaged me.
Yeah.
So one of the big ones, I suppose, is how can creation and evolution work hand in hand? So we see, as you were talking about earlier on, Genesis, we see Adam and Eve created by God. But then Charles Darwin rocks up a few hundred years ago and tells us about how animals adapt to their surroundings, etc. How can they both sort of work hand in hand?
Yeah, so really great resources to look at on this. A guy called John Walton. So on the Faraday website, there's a multimedia section, and there's loads and loads of videos. You can also download the audio if you rather listen than watch. John Walton, by a biblical scholar who's done a lot of work on this. He's from a very conservative Christian college in the US. He believes that Adam and Eve are, the actual people that God used to, start his work on earth. But he would say that what's happening in Genesis, and there's a nice explanation of this actually on the Bible Project. So I think it's Temple in Genesis or something like that, where the narrative of Genesis 1-3 is God, he's creating earth and he's setting up earth as his temple, and his presence will dwell in it, and his priests are us made in his image. So rather than setting up the idol in the temple, he sets up us made in his image to be the priest, to rule over the earth. And it's a very, very powerful image. And he'll describe it much better than me. There's also a chap called, now I'm going to forget his name. Nope, it'll come back to me. No, I've forgotten it. Anyway, another really faithful Bible scholar who wrote about the image of God. If it comes back to me, I'll say it before the end of the podcast.
Okay.
But yeah, explore the Faraday website. There's a chap called Ernest Lucas, who's another good one, who's a biblical scholar and a biochemist, actually. He's got 2 PhDs. Anyway, we don't compare ourselves to people like this. But he studied all the languages and compared with other texts. So he's one of the people who teaches the thing I said about the sun and moon. So understanding how Genesis was different to it was a polemic, if you like. It was sort of a response to the cultures around and their creation stories. Really, really interesting. And I don't think any of those ways of looking at the Bible, that this is God, this is theology, this is God telling us about himself and who we are and what we're to do, are incompatible with the science. I think Darwin was good friends with his vicar. He wanted to be buried in his local parish church. He was agnostic by the end of his life, mainly because he lost his little daughter. So there's the film about him that was out about 10 years ago. I don't think portrayed the history of his actual historical record of his faith and his wrestling with God properly. But he did, he started out Christian, he became agnostic, but it wasn't to do with science.
Okay.
It was others who took his science and said, this is against God. And I think Darwin would have been very sad about that. But I think God created us from the dust. We know that God has worked slowly. He took the Israelites 40 years through the desert. I'd have taken 4 weeks. Seriously, what was that about? He works in our lives in slow and sometimes very painful ways. He lets stuff happen to people that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. I don't know why. And I know it's sinful. It's a sinful world. It's a fallen world. But we know that his ways are not our ways. So I don't feel it's up to me to tangle with, God, why? Yeah, I could ask. And, the Psalms encourage me to ask him, why did you do it with evolution? It seems like there's so much pain and suffering on that route. Why did you take us that route? Yeah, we'll find out one day. But it's also very beautiful. And that's what I explore with Wonders of the Living World, is the cooperation that was such a major part of every major transition in the development of life. The cells in your and my bodies are actually an amalgamation of different, basically some little cells climbed inside some big cells. And the big cells needed the little cells, and the little cells needed the big cells. And together they made a really brilliant team, and they made it possible for cells to live in places they couldn't. And then when cells teamed up together, which slime mold does, they live separately, and then they make a team when food is scarce. And our bodies are a team of cells that's permanent, I hope. And then our organs all work together, and there's societies where, couples work together to bring up children, and societies work together to, all these, cooperation is incredible. So some of these biological stories, that just, or the patterns you see in, wings, have evolved again and again and again and again and again and again. There's only one way to fly, basically. It's to have wings, You can see, the way God's made his world with all these possibilities. I would try not to go on too much, but it's quite fun. It's really fun. And
that's the thing. I think these are the conversations that people need to, have more of, and need to hear, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Okay, another one we've got is, I like this one. Is intelligent life special? So if I was to interpret this one, I think it's like, if we're talking about the universe, we're the observable universe. We know that there's now billions of galaxies, each with probably got billions of suns around, orbit and whatever. So they say that statistically, life in the universe is probably relatively common. Well, there should be life up there anyway.
It seems a bit more likely now, what we know about distribution of things in the universe.
Exactly. So if life is relatively common, you'd assume that intelligence life must be out there as well. So does that mean that intelligent life is special, or?
I don't know. I mean, it's God's universe. He can do what he likes with it in a way. It's funny. There's a strand of philosophy, which I think people pick up on, that uses this language of like, is God allowed to do? It's almost as if it's like, is God allowed to do this or that? Is this possible? Is that possible? I'm like, we don't get to decide what God does, if there's life somewhere else. Is it special? Yeah, it's special. I think intelligence is amazing. And God you don't have to be very intelligent to interact with God. We can, you don't need to be a Nobel Prize winner for sure. You don't need to know any science at all, but, most humans have got enough in them, to grasp that there's a God, even, or maybe especially, I think, those with less, how can I put it? Some of us are tempted to overthink things, but kids just believe in God, and folks, some people with learning disabilities, we call it a disability, but in other senses, it can be easier to connect with God, and there are other conditions or experience in life that make it much harder to connect with him. But I think, is intelligent life special? Yeah. And if there's intelligent life somewhere else, that will be special too. And people are like, oh, well, we panic and have to worry about if Jesus is this and that. And I'm like, I think God's big enough to, let's just leave it up to him, see what he says. See what happens.
I suppose that's the way to look at it, isn't it? It doesn't matter if intelligent life is here or somewhere else. It's still a special thing, I think
we just need to stop feeling threatened, Yeah, I think when people say, oh, science versus faith, it's like, well, that's not my experience, let's talk about it, but I'm not, I think going on the defensive is counterproductive, I think.
Yeah. Okay, last one before we wrap it up.
Before I go and make dinner.
So I suppose over the last few hundred years, we've seen faith sort of get pushed aside a little bit more in people's agendas. Do you think science will ever replace faith?
Oh, I think other stuff has been replacing faith for people all the time. I think we're very good at human beings, we just read the Bible. I don't think they ever got rid of that snake on a stick that Moses got made. I think there was a bunch of people worshipping it from then on. I think they, for example, I don't think the Israelites ever fully got rid of their idols. It's replaced God for a bunch of people. I think wrongly, because I think it's a category mistake. It's an activity. It's a human activity. It's not a world. If you try and use it as a worldview, it will fall apart. We don't. Most of us don't live like that. We recognize that. We make our decisions based on, things that are not scientific all the time. And I think something I'd like to say before we wrap up is, science is a wonderful thing, and it generally studies fairly simple systems, especially physics. Talking about stars and things. It's all about hydrogen, helium, or certain elements. And you're always trying to understand things, break them down, understand how it works. And the simpler the system, the easier it is to understand and describe scientifically. But the really big questions in life, who am I? What should I do? What am I for? Who loves me? Who do I love? What should I do with this or that? Or moral questions, ethical questions. You can't answer them with science. That doesn't make science rubbish. It just makes science and not anything else. And recognizing that as human beings, like science is not, I'm sometimes a bit awkward with being like the science lady who goes around the churches, because it's not all of who I am by any stretch of the imagination, which is why I often try and let's bring it back to God's character. Let's bring it to who Jesus is. Let's bring it back to who, because it's much easier to have those conversations as Christians when we do know each other better and each other's faith better. And no scientist is a brain on a stick, So I think if we can engage as whole people with whole people, then I think the conversation is a lot easier than if we try and pretend that science can answer questions that it can't answer. It can get us near them. It can make us ask them, wow, the universe is so big. Oh, what does it all mean? Now you're asking a philosophical, a theological question. Yeah.
Absolutely. I suppose, you hear it all the time. Well, people like me do that's watching YouTube. Science is just, it's trying to understand our environment, and it's just trying to find out how things work. That's what it is. It's just trying to find things out, trying to learn.
Yeah, it's a really good, helpful technique. Really helpful technique. But seek out those stories of Christians who are scientists, and people like Francis Collins, and
Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there so you can make your dinner.
Thanks very much for my back garden socially distanced dinner.
Absolutely. Yeah. Got to stick with those social distancing rules. Mind you, it might not be for much longer.
Oh yes, no.
You never know.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad that we've had them to protect us from catching COVID. But be very glad when it's all over.
Absolutely. Go back to church normally. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks for coming on, Ruth. I've really enjoyed this one.
Good. Yeah, it was great to chat.
Thank you. And for everyone watching, thanks for watching. Bye.